Welcome and thank you for joining us. Happy Earth Day. Today's discussion is absolutely relevant to Earth Day. We're going to be talking about talent for a resilient recovery. I'm Sarah Watts-Reinert, CEO at Polytechnics Canada, and I'm pleased to be today's moderator. We're really happy to be partnering today with Canadian Colleges for Resilient Recovery to host today's panel discussion. And so a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. On your way into the session, your microphone was muted to minimize background noise. We will begin with a brief presentation from ECO Canada, followed by a panel with senior folks from 3 leading post-secondary institutions. And if you have questions for our panel, I would ask that you type them into the Q&A function. We will be turning to audience questions as we go. We are recording this session today and will be emailing a link to all participants following the webinar. And we're also live tweeting. So if I believe that we've sent the link to you through the chat function, we welcome your contributions to that discussion. So please tell us what you're thinking as we go. And with that, I will be turning things over now to Kevin Nilsson, CEO at ECO Canada. Kevin has kindly agreed to share some insights from some of their latest environmental labor market studies and setting the stage for us today. So Kevin, maybe I will pass it over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start sharing the screen here. All right. Well, thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you to Polytechnics Canada for organizing this session. I'm hoping that I'm actually showing you this presentation view as opposed to the notes pages. I'm sure someone will let me know if that's not the case. Very interesting topic to be talking about today with talent for resilient economy, and very timely right after the federal budget was released. And I'm excited to be kicking things off with such an esteemed panel of presidents coming after me. So I feel quite honored about that. Before moving on, I think it's important for me to introduce ECO Canada in the event that some of you don't know us. We are a national sector council supporting the environmental sector from a human resource point of view. We do a number of labor market research studies. This past year, we've done actually a dozen. So it's a record year for us in publishing new information for the labor market. We're always looking for trends, skills trends, opportunities, gaps that emerge in the environmental sector from a workforce development point of view. And then we try to inform the various stakeholders we have about what steps they need to take to capitalize on the opportunities and try to meet some of the gaps that are coming in the sector. Very briefly, I won't do a self-promotion, but here are sort of the key areas that we work with that might be of interest to some of the participants in the call today. We have a number of different job creation services, wage subsidies for recent graduates and students still enrolled in school. We do training, specifically training in areas that colleges and universities are not covering. We do surveys with employers every year, trying to figure out what are some of those gaps that you see with the recent graduates, and then we provide training specifically in those areas. We also accredit programs at the post-secondary level. We have 35 programs across the country that are accredited with us. And we certify individuals with the EP designations. I'm also very interested in discussing more some of the joint academic projects that we have on the go that I would like to touch base with some of the academic institutions on the call, but we'll do that later. The last point I'll mention on us is we have a pretty sophisticated Indigenous training program where we go into Indigenous communities and do training on essential skills to provide an entry-level job into the environmental sector. We now have several thousand graduates of that program, and we're working with more and more colleges to create articulation agreements because more of these entry-level Indigenous people want to have more advanced roles, and post-secondary education is a necessary step to do that. And with the training they have already, how can they get advanced standing to pursue further education? Without any further ado, before we go into the actual stats that I'm going to be presenting today, it's important to sort of define terms. What do we mean when we talk about the environmental workforce? You see 2 bubbles in front of you on the screen here, the core environmental workers and the environmental goods and services sector. When we talk about the core environmental workers, those are individuals that have been specifically trained for an environmental job and have some level of self-identification with working in the environmental sector. So those would typically be the individuals that graduate from environmental programs at your various institutions. These guys may work for an environmental company, but they may also work for Air Canada, the Port of Vancouver, any manufacturing plant, really any industry across the country, you can find core environmental workers. We also count people that work in the environmental goods and services sector, irrespective of what competencies they may have. So counted in here would be people who are, for example, finance folks working for an environmental consulting firm, or people who are in marketing for a clean tech company. They will also be considered part of the environmental workforce. High level, we define the environmental sector as being made up of these three sectors: environmental protection, management and conservation of natural resources, and environmental sustainability. You can read the number of subsectors that we cover underneath there. And for each of these areas, we have detailed competency statements and standards that have been developed. That's what we use as the backbone for our program accreditation. It's also what we use to certify individuals with the EP designation. And these are all public documents. So they're available on our website. And any curriculum developer that are looking to develop programs covering any of these areas can look at what industry requires in terms of competence. And we've had more than 40,000 individuals over the past couple of decades help draft, validate, and revise these competency standards. When we're looking at the environmental sector, everyone kind of talks about, yeah, there's a green wave where we're going to see great growth in the environmental careers. What are some of the key drivers? And I think that's an important one to kind of start with in our discussion here. We all know that the Canadian industry is heavily regulated. Canada is one of the greatest countries in the world when it comes to environmental regulation. For any project, major project that starts, you need to have an impact assessment done ahead of time before the project is approved. During the project, there's a number of different tests and monitoring activities that take place. And then after major projects, there's reclamation, remediation, and restoration. So we know that the sector is heavily regulated, which contributed greatly to this being an essential sector during the pandemic. And work still had to take place. So it's regulatory driven, which means someone will go to jail if you don't do it right. So it's so that's a key driver for the sector. Another key driver, which is really emerging more and more, is the consumer demand. We see that individuals require companies to have a sustainability plan, have a green platform and a commitment to reducing emissions or making a positive impact. Investors have that. You see more and more green funds and certification of investments, and that drives employment in a number of new areas as well into the environmental workforce. We know that funding priorities play a key role in this. Right now with economic recovery, you saw in the budget that we'll discuss more later, significant investment will be made in recovering jobs and the economy through a green lens. We know already that $9 billion was allocated to cleaning up orphan wells or abandoned drilling wells in Alberta alone, which will contribute greatly to job creation. And some of these initiatives, whether they're infrastructure initiatives or other, will continue to see great growth in the environmental sector. Also, some of the Canadian international commitments will require new jobs to be created, whether that is net zero emissions by 2050, or some of those ambitious targets that Environment Canada has on making sure that 25% of Canada's landmass will be a nature conserved area by 2025. Or 30% by 2030. Pretty aggressive commitments we've made that all need really competent people to be able to get us there. And but this is sort of the size of BC will be a nature conservancy area, which is quite significant. Highlights. This is sort of my favorite slide that I picked out of a recent report that was published in March, actually. It shows, you see the black line here. I'm not sure if my mouse is visible, but you see this is the total employment in Canada before the pandemic. So we had 19.1 million in total employed, irrespective of industry, before the pandemic. Then we lost 1 million jobs during the pandemic to 18.1 million, and that's almost recovered now to 18.9 million. You see that V-shaped form of the trajectory here. The green line underneath is the environmental workforce. It did not see the same reduction and rebound. Still, during the pandemic, which was quite hard, we added 35,000 net new jobs, or a 5% growth during 2020, which is quite significant. And we had published a report in October, which was partially covering some of the pandemic trends. We had to update that report in March because we'd already exceeded our forecast. So the new forecast that we project is that the environmental sector will see a growth of 17% of 2020 levels over the next 5 years. So the total employment in the environment is 689,900 as of 2020. We anticipate needing close to 75,000 new jobs based on growth in the sector. And then we also anticipate close to 100,000 replacement jobs are needed as the workforce is aging. So that totally makes up for our projection of 172,700 net new hiring requirements by 2025. I don't have time to go into the details of every slide here, but all our reports are available free of charge if you go to eco.ca/research, and you can look into greater details of some of those areas where there are critical shortages expected. One important one to mention on this slide, senior management. As more and more of the experienced people are retiring, it's not enough to just graduate young people to fill new roles. We need to also have effective mechanism for transitioning workers into the environmental sector from declining areas. And the smallest working population within the environmental sector as a 40-year-olds. And that is a challenge. We know with our programs, we need to ensure that people can move into leadership and advance in their careers much more rapidly now than before. We also need to persuade people to stay longer in their jobs. And this is something that's difficult when we talk with business leaders, is to think about the future challenges when right now is difficult enough. I include one slide here from our old October report to highlight further areas where higher job growth rates are expected. Again, you can read further details about the justification in our report, but sustainable transportation, clean tech, nature conservation, water quality, green building and energy efficiency, and renewable energy. And the one thing I want to mention around green building and energy efficiency that's quite exciting is that I think within that area, we've really unlocked the potential in a much better way, where this is really a win-win scenario. If we have better technology and more efficient buildings, you save energy, which is both environmentally positive, but it's also financially positive. Therefore, you get more buy-in, and it doesn't become one of those economy versus the environment. It becomes both of them together, and both impacts are considered. We deal a lot with our stakeholder network is quite broad, from far extreme on the tree hugger side to the far opposite side. And it's important to bring all the voices together to create a strong workforce that can actually come up with solutions. It's no longer enough to highlight a problem, you have to come with a solution. And that's really where academia need to really move in to make sure that the skill set for the recent graduates and the transitioning workers really are focused on some of those solutions that we'll see. I'll mention one thing that's frequently heralded as a problem is the airline industry. We're challenged with a reduced fly less. That's a good commitment to reducing emissions. We should do meetings like we're doing right now on Zoom. Well, the average or the total energy consumption of data centers globally is about the same as the global airline industry. So by moving one problem from one area to another, you're not solving things. So I'm not saying we should stop with these initiatives, but you need to consider the unintended consequences. Same with electric vehicles. We're all for electric vehicles, but if the charging stations are diesel powered, you're just moving one problem to another area. And these are the things that are the skill sets that are needed. Identify new areas. We need renewable energy. We need to be innovative in new spaces, but we need to think about the consequences, and we need to have an honest discussion, and we need to move away from this us against them mentality, which is often a big challenge for us working in the sector. I mentioned that the environmental space is growing by a rate of 17%, but is there a question? Oh, okay. 17% over the next 5 years. Retirement is 30%. So we anticipate that 30% of the current workforce will be retired by 2029. Significant challenge that we have to address. When we did this update or this report 3 years ago, that number was 22%. So the workforce continues to age. I'm going to quickly wrap up here, but the last slide I'm going to show shows that green job opportunities are available in every region across the country. The greatest growth we're projecting is in Alberta. That has something to do with both with the growth we're anticipating and the rebound, but also the fact that the employment market was already depressed before we went into the pandemic with the natural resource reduction. And in our reports that you can download on our website, we have dedicated sections to every province and territory, and you can read more about a number of different factors contributing to the employment in those regions. So I think that's all I had time for right now. So back to you, Sarah. In summary, the sector is growing at a rate of 17%, retirement is 30%, lots of great opportunities in the environmental sector.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Kevin. I really appreciate that. I believe that you'll be rejoining us a little later to take some audience questions. So if anyone has questions for Kevin, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A box, and we'll circle back to those when he joins us again. In the meantime, I would now like to introduce our panelists. Fred Meyer is President and CEO at Red River College in Manitoba. Ron McCurley, President and CEO at Mohawk College, based in Ontario. And Tom Romer, Vice President Academic at the British Columbia Institute of Technology. All three schools are involved with Canadian Colleges for Resilient Recovery. And maybe rather than explaining what exactly that is myself, I'll turn first to you, Ron. Can you talk a little bit about Canadian Colleges for Resilient Recovery, that initiative, and maybe how the group came together with what purpose?
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah, for hosting this. Thank you, Kevin, for that great introduction. Thank you, Fred and Tom, for being with us today. The idea for Canadian Colleges for Resilient Recovery, or C2r2, which is the acronym we use, was formed out of Mohawk's Center for Climate Change Management early last summer. It was kind of born out of the growing realization that there was a significant impact coming to the workforce as a result of the pandemic. And then the goals were further aligned around the federal government's September throne speech and the government's desire to create 1 million jobs and build back better as we emerge from the pandemic. Our goal was to bring together colleges and polytechnics and CEGEPs from across Canada who are already leaders in some element of climate action, and then focus our collective energies in preparing to support a comprehensive effort working with industry to train and retrain Canadians for the jobs that will be available post-pandemic. And that's what we already do collectively as a system so well. We also recognize that there are some groups across the country who have been particularly hard hit by job loss during this pandemic. So women, Indigenous and minorities, students, lower income workers, in particular, all of those groups. And we're working to ensure that the needs of these groups are also well represented as we move forward and as we look at a resilient recovery. So specifically, the 15 institutions that are founding partners of C2r2 are collaborating in a number of key areas. First, some of them working to create a national curriculum to be shared widely to allow training programs to launch faster, to reach more people more quickly. Second, to work with industry on industry's applied research challenges. So to be able to improve processes or get them back into the market more quickly. And then third, to act as demonstration sites for the art of the possible in sectors such as clean tech and manufacturing and buildings and renewable energy and transportation and so on and so on. And finally, then to support this work, as all of these champions and leaders came together to help lead this initiative, we've created an advisory council that represents national industry and nonprofit partners, including national Indigenous associations and youth representation. And this advisory council will provide the coalition with insights and directions on the training and the applied research needed in their sector to support a resilient recovery. So that's kind of the genesis of it. We have lots of willing partners here in the founding members, and all of them are leaders in their own right.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And maybe Fred, just to you, how does Red River fit into that C2r2 initiative if it's really about working collaboratively, but also leveraging each institution's strengths and local expertise and action? What does that look like at Red River? I'm thinking students, faculty, your community, your larger community, your industry partners.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah, and thanks for the invitation today, and happy Earth Day to everybody as well. Ron did an excellent job of describing the initiative as well. And I'd say when we look at how Red River College contributes as part of the initiative, I would say it's very similar to how all of the different institutions are. It really is around collaboration, and each institution leveraging our own expertise with our partners across the country. And really, the partnership for Red River College is about leveraging that local capacity and expertise for really that national collective benefit. And Kevin did a great job talking about how this is not region specific. This is specific to our entire country. So it's taking that and leveraging across. We look at things like the ability to develop curriculum and creating opportunities to support our students, and then our local SMEs as well, as they face technological disruption and growth as they go forward as well. That ability to share curriculum so that we can stand them up, be they micro-credentials or other types of learning to allow for upskilling and reskilling to occur over a much quicker period of time as well. So those are the benefits we see. We see that as benefits for our local SMEs, our local industry as well, through a national collective collaborative effort that we have as well. And specifically for us, what we bring to this partnership as well is some unique aspects. So for us, that means things like leveraging our expertise in vehicle technology. Recently, there was a webinar that Red River College hosted on zero emission vehicles. It was really the first seminar that C2r2 had presented as well. So that comes from our partnership with a local bus manufacturer and some of the charging technology that Red River College was involved in designing. It means leveraging our building envelope and technology center. Just today, we announced some new technology that we're putting on a new building here, our innovation center, around building integrated photovoltaics, first installation in North America. So an ability to share that type of information and the data that comes from that as well across the country through this initiative as well. And then I would add the other way that we fit in, and Ron touched on this as well, as Manitoba has the highest urban Indigenous population in the country within Winnipeg, we look at walking alongside our Indigenous communities and with our knowledge keepers and our elders here to help with program development, to help with applied research, and ensuring that we're developing the right pathways and supports as we go forward as well. So those are some of the ways that Red River College, I would say, participates as part of the initiative and some of our input as well.
Fantastic, thanks. Tom, I turn to you and say, can you speak to one or two of the headline initiatives coming out of C2r2 in these early days with BCIT, another one of those kind of founding institutions. What brought BCIT on board?
Good question, Sarah. Maybe I can start actually with that. Why did BCIT join? So our official mandate is that of strategic workforce development. And that's of course the same for all the large polytechnics across the country. But in this context, strategic really means a couple of things. One is we work with industry and the public sector to anticipate the characteristics and, if you want, the composition of the workforce in the future. The other one is to step out of our local context and look at the development through a provincial or national, if you want, even global lens. A lot of us work internationally now. And so at BCIT, we strongly believe that we won't be able to solve the big problems of our times, like climate change, with sort of a disjointed local investment and solution provision. Instead, we need to address them with a more concerted and coordinated and synchronized effort. And so when C2r2 called and asked us to join, We saw that as a little bit as a platform, if you want, as a foundation to get something big going. And the opportunity to do things smarter than before, and that's the resilient recovery, as Ron said, that was quite pretty much the icing on the cake. So with that, really, we currently have a bit of a unique situation, I would say. COVID-19 actually, interestingly, has not really brought forward radical changes in technology or human behavior. Instead, it has dramatically accelerated pre-existing trends. We've had digital transformation and telecommuting and a generational shift in the workforce well before COVID. Only we used to measure those changes in years and sometimes even decades. And suddenly we find ourselves measuring them in months. And that's where the dramatic shift happened. And since you asked them for an example of of headline initiatives, I think the one that permeates all of our individual target disciplines that we have chosen within C2r2 and that permeates our member institutions is that new concept of micro-credentials and open credentials. And what that is, I think a lot of people have talked about it in various contexts, but maybe to give a quick background. So we are currently experiencing a dramatic shift in the workforce. As Kevin has said already, the share of baby boomers is now dropping. It has actually dropped in Canada well under 20% now, and it continues to drop rapidly. COVID has really accelerated that. Boomers wants to get out. They don't want to be faced with that new technology. They realize that there's more to the rest of their life than sticking in the workforce. So they're retiring faster than predicted, which is a direct impact of that pandemic. At the same time, the Generation X, so those are the people born between 65 and 80, they're trying to make sense of that digital transformation, which requires upskilling and reskilling for a bit of a, I don't know what word you want to use, a new reality is maybe one. But most importantly for us, millennials and Generation Z, so the people born 80 and after, they together now comprise the majority of the workforce. And with that comes a noticeable shift in behavior, in preferences, in approach, and so forth. And with Google and the likes pushing into the educational market, we as post-secondary had better pay attention to that. So our old time-honored mantras of, hey, it was good for me, so it's good for you, or hey, trust me, we know best, you will need all of this later in life, just take the course now, that just doesn't fly anymore with a modern learner. And with this in mind, we devised a strategy that we call, at BCIT, we call it Agile Learning, but the word is catching on elsewhere as well. And Agile Learning can be described in pretty much three quick ways. One is it's bite-sized competency-based learning. So an increasing number of students now doesn't want to commit anymore to years of post-secondary study, but they say, tell me what I need to know today to do the job that I want to do. And we call that just-in-time learning. And the vehicle for this is what we call micro-credentials, and badges are a form of micro-credentials broken down. And so in essence, these are short cycle credentials that convey a single competency or a clearly delineated skill set, if you want to go that way. So that's one. The second one is a more flexible learning. And this means that we allow students to combine the micro-credentials from different fields. So we allow them to create almost an a la carte approach to education. They can combine the disciplines that they think they need for their career. So a typical example would be an aspiring entrepreneur may want to assemble a custom skill set around marketing, technology, app programming, you name it. And who am I as an educator to say, no, sorry, I have to put you into this one box and you learn all of this first, and then you can go into the next box and the next box. Allow them the flexibility. And of course, this also includes the methodology of learning. So e-learning, distributed learning, and all these elements are part of that flexibility category as well. And the third of them, sorry?
Oh, I was just going to say, so it's so interesting to see that that's something, as you say, that is that's a BCIT approach, and sort of the thinking about distributing that learning back to learners, and then thinking about now how to do that, particularly around recovery and green and climate change and all of those ambitions, and obviously the collaboration with the wider network.
No, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned before, the Gen Xers might now want to just take individual courses to add to their skill set. But the modern learners are trying to assemble a custom skill set right from the get-go. And we estimate right now the size of that category at about 15%, 18%, but it's growing rapidly. So that's why I'm saying we had better pay attention to that, or otherwise the more or perceived more nimble providers like the Googles and so on will take over the learning process. But the third element that I wanted to mention, Sarah, is the non-academic learning. Within the post-secondary system, we need to accept that many people gain practical skills outside the ivory towers of academia. And this could be the armed forces, that could be first responders, this could be indigenous knowledge, or any kind of form of learning that fall into the definition of what's now touted as work integrated learning. So service learning, field learning, preceptorships, apprenticeships, you name it. And traditionally, quite frankly, in post-secondary, we have often said, hey, let me see if I can hold my nose a bit, and I give you some academic credit for the knowledge that you're bringing in, but this whole prior learning assessment element was always a little bit from a higher pedestal, so to speak. And now we're saying, hey, let me see if I can tailor my offerings around your background so that you can achieve what we would call academic standing. And so those are the three elements that BCIT is embarking on, that we brought to C2r2, because we truly believe that the economic recovery, and especially the resilient recovery, needs those two key ingredients. One is the educational product needs to resonate with the client. And when I say client, that means both employers and the modern learner. And secondly, we need a systemic and a systematic approach. You probably know Canada is the only G8 member without a national Ministry of Education. And so C2r2 provided a platform where we can step in here and create a national framework of sorts for the willing, so to speak. So in our first step, and that brings us back to your first question, we set out to create a national system of micro-credentials that support the resilient recovery. And we're trying to coordinate that so that we can build on our respective strengths, because all of our institutions have a different approach and have different strengths, and we avoid redundancy in development. And from that, we want then to create a national repository so that students from across Canada can have, let's say, one location, ideally on the web somewhere, where they can look up the whole spectrum of available courses for a given topic. So let's say I want to know about drone operations. I'm a farmer. I want to do agricultural monitoring with drones. Where do I go? I go to the site, say, oh, look at that. There's 7 institutions out there. 5 of them offer the course in an e-learning format. Excellent, this one is flexible. I get a micro-credential for it. That's where I go. It doesn't need to be confined to your local context. It can be a truly national approach. And that really is what we're trying to do. So I'm currently chairing the National Curriculum Development Committee, and that's what we're trying to achieve a little bit, that one-stop approach, so to speak, where somebody can go out and find everything they need.
Fantastic. So yeah, you're clearly very passionate about that topic. So I can see why they asked you to lead the group for sure. So I just wanted to turn. So earlier this week, the federal government tabled its first budget in 2 years. I think we saw some really clear signals ahead of time that some of those post-pandemic investments would include skills and talents. So some of what you're talking about, Tom, but also some moves to address climate change. So I guess maybe Ron, I'll ask you, were there any surprises from your perspective?
Well, it was a pretty comprehensive budget, no question about that. I don't think I've ever, in my many years, seen a budget that had that many pieces to it, or that many pages to it, or that many zeros attached to it. I think if there were surprises at all, it was that the government did pretty much exactly what was being asked for in terms of significant pools of money to support workforce development, training and upskilling, climate and the environment, work placements and youth employment. So it really is, it's a budget for everybody, but more importantly, it is true to, I think, what they said in the throne speech, which was to build back better. They are really, I think, truly sticking to what they committed to in the throne speech, which was trying to generate 1 million new jobs, prepare people for those jobs, and do it in jobs that are going to make a difference going forward, as opposed to same old type of jobs. So you don't always see perfect alignment between a throne speech and a budget. I think this is as good as I've seen. It's certainly incredibly comprehensive, and I think there's a lot there that we can work with as post-secondary institutions, and I'm excited about the opportunity to get down to work and to get people prepared for those new jobs, many of which Tom and Fred have already alluded to.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And so, Fred, if I asked you, would you add anything there? I'm thinking about some of the things that you've been talking about Red River and its applied research capacity and those industry connections. I mean, what have you been hearing? And then how do you look at that budget and say, okay, so what comes next for what Red River can put on the table?
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. I'd go back to some of the earlier comments that I made around a collaboration and really, the benefit of C2r2 and the cooperation that exists there. We've seen in the budget that there are a lot of funding supports in many different areas. They're in organizations and third parties, directly to students as well. So there's quite a variety of areas of funding is going into. The ability for the cooperation through our initiative, through C2r2, allows the ability for us to access and leverage our collective expertise in different areas to look at those types of partnerships and the coordination. So, I would say from Red River's perspective, for example, funding in my tax has been something very strong for us, and we benefited deeply from that as well. Those are the types of opportunities we're looking for as well. But as Ron said, I mean, the budget was very strong on sustainability, on climate change, the importance of applied research, which is a strength of our institution, many polytechnics and CEGEPs as well, and colleges as well, and really that direct tie to labor market needs and industry SMEs as well. So that's sort of what we see inside of the budget as well, and sort of how we want to move forward, Sarah.
And maybe the challenge that I would put to you is, to Ron's point, there's a lot there, not only lots of zeros, but lots of different initiatives. And so when I have a bit of an opportunity to pick your brains on this, what I want to know is, okay, so you've got a lot of different initiatives. They're all over the place. So we're talking about $17+ billion on sustainable green recovery, all kinds of additional money on the skills and talent side where you're all clearly experts. Is there a role for C2r2 or colleges in general to make the linkage between those things? And maybe Tom, I'll let you take a first crack at that.
That brings us a little bit back to the whole repository idea, Sarah. We want to avoid the redundancy that we have seen in the past. We are about 150 colleges and institutes across Canada. And we have developed a lot of similar programs. And by now coordinating this a little bit, by driving it towards a common target, we hope to basically utilize the taxpayers' dollars a little bit more efficiently than we might have done before. What it will also almost alongside what it will introduce is more mobility, because if you have programs that are articulated across multiple institutions, the mobility for the learner, for the graduate, is automatically included. And that is something that we have to be aware of. The modern society is much more mobile than it was before. And I do think we have a great vehicle here to do things a little bit more in a concerted effort. And the other one is also, we want to make sure that we include industry in the development of those micro-credentials. That's a very, very important point. This is not a bunch of institutes that dream up a few courses and hope to market them properly. It is really an effort with industry to say, what do you need? What is the skills that we need to convey in small bite-sized chunks? And that has always been the strength of the Polytechnic Institute. It's that direct liaison with industry, so that we don't need to test drive our products first. We know that they will resonate because they have been demanded from the end user. And really just as an example, at BCIT, we just created a micro-credential about mass timber construction. That came directly from industry. There's a new way of dealing with lumber. Can you create a course around it? We expected about 150 people to enroll. We ended up with 600. Those are the success stories that I think implicitly create a proof of concept right away for the road that we want to go down.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And maybe just before, I know that we're going to get to some audience questions, and just before that, I just want to make sure we have a minute to think about green talent pipeline, because I think that to be fair, none of the resilient recovery is going to happen without the people who have the skills to make it happen. And so, Ron, I'm thinking about your Center for Climate Change Management. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
So, I mean, that is really an opportunity to be thinking about how do we create that green talent pipeline that Kevin talked about, that is going to be needed. That is not just about one industry, it's about across industries, but everybody now needs to know from their occupation about what it means for resilient, what resiliency is going to mean for their sector.
Well, it's a number one thing when I'm talking to CEOs of companies. Talent is far outstrips their need for capital or good ideas or markets to sell to its people. And one of the skill sets that they want is everybody understanding sustainability principles, how to make sure that you build something with the end of that product in mind, so that you can take care of your waste at the end of the day, because there's going to be liability associated with that. At Mohawk now, 100% of our academic departments provide students with sustainability course offerings. We have over 370 courses now, which have sustainability principles baked into them. Because in the future, there aren't going to be any jobs. This is the number one problem that our generation or the next is going to have to deal with, is the impacts of climate change. And so everybody's got to be thinking about climate action. And so all students, I think, going forward are going to have to understand and be champions for, sustainable practices. So that, I think, becomes, to Tom's point, it becomes part of our DNA in terms of how we have to look at programs, how we have to think about offerings, how we have to think about even the staff that we hire and our own workforce, which need the same set of skills and abilities and thought processes. So it's not something that sits at the edge of our desk anymore. It has to be core to the way we think about employees, the way we think about students, the way we think about our work with industry and so on. So it is all encompassing at this point, and it has to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, Fred, it was you that said it's not a matter of just what industry wants or just what the right direction. It's like students are demanding that too. You get kind of a sense of, young people aren't willing to do things the way they were always done before. You sort of getting that sense at Red River?
Yeah, we are. And, I'd go back to a point that that Tom had made on customized learning and how that is going to shape the way that we learn into the future. And it's really going to be the demand of the students. I think the other thing that that Tom didn't mention, but is an important part, is it reduces barriers as well. And I mentioned earlier about, those learners that had previously had barriers to post-secondary education. Here you think about, single moms and working parents or working adults who couldn't take time off to take a full program. This customized approach really does allow, and now what we're learning through blended learning and online learning allows access to post-secondary education that previously wasn't there before. We're hearing that also from industry. As Ron had mentioned, talent is something that we hear about all the time when we're sitting down with our industry partners about shaping our curriculums, and that they can't lose employees to go to a full-time program. They need to have an ability to upskill and reskill while they're still there. So we need to look at that flexibility that Tom had said is built into that sort of customized approach as something that is going to be the future of learning as well, moving forward.
Fantastic. Well, you know what, Tom, I'm going to let you answer that, and in the meantime, let's bring Kevin back, and then we'll look at some of the audience questions as well. But please go ahead.
Yeah, Fred's making an excellent point, and to draw that even further out, the whole micro-credential approach also serves the marginalized learners. We have seen that a lot of our long-term programs, and even 2 years is already a long-term program for a lot of learners that do not have the study skills or the opportunities to engage in the educational process. That can already be a barrier. What the micro-credentials do, it provides the opportunity to reach a credential, to reach an endpoint very quickly. That in return instills self-esteem, that gives the opportunity then to look for the next chunk, and so on, And this, I think, will open, just as Fred said, the avenue for learners that we have so far not been able to serve properly. But we have a brand new client group that we can add to the mix, so to speak.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's turn to one of our first audience questions. Dave Santee asks, he says, first of all, thank you for your leadership and ensuring Canada's competitiveness and preparing the workforce. He's asking, will you be consulting with industry and experts on the training and micro-credential requirements? And presumably, he's talking about through a C2r2 lens. Is that a part of your mandate? Ron, do you want to take that one?
Well, we do some of that now. So we work with industry right now in terms of applied research and consulting with them on changes that they're trying to make. Can I give one example, Sarah? It might be more effective than talking about in generalities. So you mentioned that Mohawk colleges in Ontario. We're actually in Hamilton. Hamilton, of course, is steel capital of Canada, which is why they call it Steel Town. Steel is one of the largest emitters of greenhouse gases. A ton of steel produces 1.85 tons of carbon dioxide. We're working with Dofasco right now on investigating a solution that would trial the use of biocarbons. So it's a coal substitute. So instead of burning coal, you burn waste wood. So our students are working with Dofasco on the supply chain and logistics for getting wood waste basically transported in to use in the early stages of coal production. For every, if this works, we can take out tens of thousands of tons of CO2 out of the air. What do the students get out of it? They learn about supply chain, they learn about logistics, they learn about the carbon footprint of transporting waste wood, they learn about the carbon footprint of burning coal. That steel represents 8% of all the global CO2 emissions. what does the industry get? They get a willing, bunch of really bright people working on the problem that they're trying to solve so they can be a much greener manufacturer. So it's those types of win-win with, it's part consulting, it's part applied research, it's part just finding the problems, the wicked problems that industry is trying to solve, and then volunteering to work alongside them to make that happen.
Absolutely. Great. So we have a question for you, Kevin, from Nino Belvedere at SAIT. Do you have much data on wages in emerging industries compared to oil and gas jobs, which is obviously especially important in Alberta, where I know that you're also located?
Yeah, no, so that was on slide 20 on the presentation I didn't get through today, but we actually have a compensation report on our website. That one, unlike most other things, are not free. And the reason it's not free is that employers that were willing to contribute detailed data did not want this to be a tool that individuals use to talk their own salary up. So we tried to create a product that was really for employers, thinking it from their point of view, it was that they don't use salary surveys or compensation reports because they're skewed. They always have a purpose to drive salary in one way or another. What I can say is that the average or the median salary for an environmental worker across, irrespective of what industry they work in, whether they're a scientist, engineer, how many years of service, is that the median is $60,000. That goes up and down depending on level, where in the country you are, and also what sector you are in. The interesting fact is that we're seeing, and especially in Calgary, but we're seeing it across the country, that public sector jobs are becoming salary leaders. In Calgary, oil and gas in particular, and I know this because I worked oil and gas on 3 continents, salaries in Calgary were inflated beyond belief. Even executives in Houston were saying, how did we get so out of control in Calgary? So when salaries were that out of control for oil and gas workers, municipal governments had to kind of keep pace with that. And then when the salaries took a big slash, public sector can't take the same big slash. So that's why you have now all of a sudden public sector being salary leaders in an environment. But oil and gas workers transitioning into the environmental sector, much bigger concern 5 years ago than it is now, because the salary levels have flattened significantly. You don't see people with 4 years of experience with an engineering degree making $300,000 in Calgary in oil and gas anymore. Those days are gone, and some say they will never return because they were so out of control, but who knows?
Yeah. So Ron, I got a question for you. I'm recognizing that C2r2, as you said, I think is 15 institutions right now. Obviously, that's not involving every college, or for that matter, every Polytechnic or every CEGEP across the country. Do you see the group expanding? Are there other ways or others that can contribute over time?
Yeah, good question. This was never intended to be an elite club. It was intended to be a coalition of the willing to start the work, to get things going, to build some momentum, to start to see some action. This is going to require, this retraining to get 1 million people back in the workforce is going to require every college, CEGEP, Polytechnic, across the country to be participating in this. So, and certainly the money that the federal government has earmarked for this is sufficient to allow that to happen. This was really, you can't lead something with 150 people at the table. So this was a small enough group to be able to drive forward with some actions, which we've been able to do, and to see some progress. So absolutely, in fact, we're working with your institution as well as colleges and Institute Canada, so CICAN, to make sure that everybody can come into the tent and everybody is participating. And this kind of change, when you're dealing with something of this magnitude, it's going to require all hands on deck to bring about that kind of substantive, long-lasting, meaningful change.
Absolutely. So Fred, we have another question from the audience, and somebody who's, again, thinking about applied research as a form of work integrated learning, thinking about it both from the perspective of students, who are involved in getting that sort of real world experience, and then the industry partners, the small and medium sized enterprise whose employees can receive training through their involvement at an academic institution. So just in terms of sort of thinking about that as a two-way street with mutual benefits, both for industry and for students. Do you think that from the private sector lens that is something that they see that value proposition?
Certainly in the in the SMEs and the industries that we've worked with, they've really seen that in my discussions recently. And this really goes to the story that Kevin was telling and everybody else has highlighted today. The demand for talent is really outstripping supply at this point in time. It really underlines what our initiative is. And so we're seeing an increasing willingness to sit down and work through applied research projects to not only benefit from the students that are there and the talent that will eventually come into your organization, but also that we're helping them adopt that new technology to develop new products. Again, we have to remember we're competing from a global perspective as a country. I think sometimes we tend to think we're competing with each other from a province or from an institute perspective, but really it's a global marketplace that we're trying to prepare ourselves for. And there are great opportunities to move forward from that perspective through applied research. I think the other thing that I didn't mention that is an opportunity as well, we speak a lot about a collaboration around curriculum and other things. What we really have on applied research perspective is some facilities that are very unique at our institutions. The ability to leverage those across the country. For example, we have a motive lab. It's 7,000 square feet. It has a dyno that takes some of the largest equipment inside of the country. The ability to leverage that type of equipment and those facilities for benefit across the country is really another benefit of C2r2 and the initiative, the collaboration and the cooperation.
That's a really, really good point. The fact that you can actually pull on each other's facilities and areas of expertise to respond to industry. You don't all have to build the same things over and over again. So I really love what I'm hearing around the C2r2 initiative. I think what has really struck me is that collaboration. Like, we've got a bigger thing here than any one institution, any one province, any one company. And we've really got to figure out the ways to be able to, from what Tom said, you leverage the micro-credentials and some of the curriculum that's being put together. But you've said, Fred, in terms of being able to, leverage facilities. And so I really like that sort of collaboration and the leadership to make it happen. It's great to see that coming from the college community. So I would just say thank you all for joining us today. For those of us who are interested in learning more about some of the things going on at different C2r2 institutions, I know there are a couple of additional webinars coming up. Fred mentioned the one from Red River recently on May 13th. Seneca has one coming up. And on June 10th, Mohawk will be talking about zero carbon buildings as well. And I believe that my staff is going to make sure that the link gets into the chat. So those who are interested in following up for more information and being part of those webinars have an opportunity to find out more information and register. But perhaps just kind of leaving it, maybe the last word to you, Ron. I mean, anything that we didn't talk about that you would want folks to know about?
There's a lot we didn't talk about because we only had an hour, but I just want to thank our partners from coast to coast to coast across the country who are supporting this work. There's some great institutions. We have a great advisory group that's been pulled together as well. The Secretariat is in the Climate Change Center at Mohawk College, supporting all of this great work. but we've got some great support out of government as well. So we're really looking forward to the next stage, which is actually delivering on all of these commitments to the benefit of all the people that are looking for jobs and the employers that are looking for a workforce. So thank you, Sarah, for sponsoring and hosting us today. Very much appreciated to have your support. And thank you for Kevin, Fred, and Tom for joining us today as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, everybody. And we'll be sending a link to the recorded webinar to everyone who is registered today. So thanks so much for joining us, and have a great day.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.